Hello, everyone. Welcome to New Wave Global. My name is Nauraiz Rana, and in today's program, I'll be talking about the significance or the insignificance of the International Court of Justice's, the ICJ's ruling, its order for provisional measures on the case by South Africa against Israel for Israel's genocidal action against the people of Palestine in direct violation of the Genocide Convention. Now, I'm quite certain that everyone who's listening in are very well aware of the fundamentals and the dynamics of the hearings and the case, and even more broadly of the conflict that has unfolded and evolved over the course of the last 5 months. But just to briefly provide a quick overview, it was on December 29th that South Africa submitted an 84-page application with documented evidence covering actions which it considered amount to genocide by Israel on the people of Palestine. Following which, a series of hearings were initiated, and in which both parties presented their arguments. And it was on January 26, 2024, that the ICJ passed its order for provisional measures, voting 15 to 17, that is 15 of the 17 judges on the ICJ panel, voted for emergency measures responding to most of what South Africa had called for in its application. I would say most, because despite the decree, and which we'll go in the nitty-gritty details of it, the ICJ shied away from calling for an outright and immediate ceasefire. Now, I want to delve into the provisional measures that the court ordered on Israel. There were 6 of them, but before we go into them, it is very imperative and necessary to understand that the case and the ruling was not to definitively ascertain or establish that Israel was committing genocide, but was rather a first and a major significant step towards a more longer judicial process whose verdict may take years to materialize. And this is so because usually due to bureaucratic intricacies, the complexities involved in order to rightly verify and establish evidence in the right manner, no matter how profound or obvious it may be, as is in this case, it takes years and years. And therefore, in the meantime, the court orders provisional measures. Now, coming back to what those provisional measures were, the ICJ ordered Israel to do all within its power to ensure that it does not commit acts of genocide, that its military does not commit acts of genocide, that it punishes and prevents incitement of any kind towards genocide. The other very important provision was that it does whatever it can, and it takes immediate and effective measures to enable humanitarian services, humanitarian assistance, and enable crucial services for the people of Palestine and for the people of Gaza. And the 5th provision was to make sure that it does not alter the evidence relating to the acts and measures that it has carried, and which may be used in making the decision, in the longer decision for this case. And the 6th provisional measure was for Israel to respond back within 30 days with the report highlighting and outlining all the measures that it has taken in order to comply with this order. Now, this ruling was both celebrated, it was both welcomed, and it was also criticized by Palestinian and pro-Palestinian supporters. And it's not because they felt that one side was favored more than the other, but because of the ambiguity that it perpetuated in terms of the efficacy of its implementation, it's the implications of the rulings, and more importantly, what it symbolized. For those who celebrated, felt that it was a major symbolic victory, a moral victory, for it was the first time that it exposed and ratified Israel's flagrant disregard for international and humanitarian law. And it called out Israel for its military expedition, where it ruthlessly and brutalizingly killed thousands of innocent people, innocent civilians, including women, children, and men. A narrative which was never acknowledged and was never put out there by Western media and by Western powers. On the other hand, on the flip side, those who felt disheartened and disappointed by ICJ's rulings were of the idea that despite all what the provisional measures mandated, the ICJ fell quite short of setting a precedent similar to what it had in the case of the Russia versus Ukraine, where the ICJ, the court, had ruled the Russian Federation to immediately and unconditionally halt its military operations that it had taken and embarked upon on the Ukrainian territories. 6 weeks onwards, during the last 6 weeks, there was a lot of arguments and there were a lot of debates on what these provisional measures really meant. There was a lot of discussions to unravel and demystify their implications, and to understand whether they equated for an implicit or indirect call for ceasefire. But if you look at Israel's continuous and unrelentless onslaught after the ruling was passed, its continuous and indiscriminate bombing, its torture, its executionary style killings of innocent women, children, and men, and the number of death toll that has increased over the course of the last 6 weeks, it renders all these arguments, all these debates completely obsolete and useless. The situation has only gotten much more dire, and the world has been a silent witness to it, including the UN agencies and the International Court of Justice. Israel has not only not complied with these provisional measures that were ordered, but has acted in complete disregard, violating all the clauses with complete and utter impunity. If we just look at the key numbers, between October 7th, when Israel started its war on Gaza, and December 29th, when the case was first filed by South Africa, the number of people who had died as a result of Israel's onslaught was over 21,000. On January 26th, when the ruling was passed, the number had gone up to over 26,000. In 6 weeks onwards, that is as of March 8th, 2024, the number of people who've died has increased to a staggering figure of 30,838, which includes over 13,000 children. And it's important to bear in mind that these numbers are grossly understated because it does not counter for the people who are missing and probably dead, and many more who do not have an actual verifiable record with the Health Ministry of Gaza, with the Health Ministry of Palestine. The condition is catastrophic, and it has already led to the creation of an artificial humanitarian disaster in the form of hunger and starvation. Now, every day, people are dying not only because of Israel's bombardment, Israel's torture, and its killings and its shooting of innocent civilians, but they're also now day and day onwards dying of hunger, dying due to lack of access to basic necessities such as food, staples, medicines, healthcare. The crisis is evolving exponentially, and there's no parallels which can be found in the global history of warfare anywhere, in the history of conflict, or in the history of violence. If we compare it to the numbers, the number of average deaths daily, the amount of deaths happening in Palestine and Gaza supersede those that have happened anywhere else, whether that was Syria, whether that was Yemen, whether they were in the DRC, or in sub-Saharan Africa, for instance. And in all, as all of this is happening, there's a likelihood that millions of Palestinian people will be exposed to irreparable damage, physically, mentally, in ways that we cannot even understand how it manifests. The key underlying problem further is to highlight that just yesterday, the Prime Minister of Israel, Netanyahu, declared that they would press ahead with an on-ground assault on Rafah, which at the moment is sheltering and holding over 1.5 million internally displaced refugees. The situation could not have been more horrific, but in this case, this ground assault the repercussions would be unfathomable, where while currently we're witnessing hundreds of deaths each day, it would translate into thousands of people dying every day, and the world would continue to watch on. And in all, it is very important to highlight the role of the Biden-led US administration. They've been the diplomatic and the financial funders of this war. And while they were labeled as the enablers and as the ones that Israel most profoundly benefited from, their role can now be quite clearly categorized as partners, as party, as the one complicit to this ongoing genocide. On February 20th, 2024, almost a month after ICJ's ruling and ICJ's order, the UN passed a resolution for humanitarian ceasefire, which was vetoed by the United States. And it was the third time that they did so, vetoing similar resolutions in the past twice since October 7th, when the conflict first ensued. Additionally, the UN agency, the United States administration, with the help of its Western allies, in alignment with Western allies, stopped the funding of UNWRA, the relief and workers UN agencies working for the Palestinian refugees, on the basis that there was that 14 of the agency's members, workers, may have been members of Hamas as well. A story that was alleged, but without any probable proof. But despite that, it did not merit the grounds of complete halting of its funding. These are just two examples of how the US, over the course of the last 6 weeks after the ICJ's rulings, has further enabled Israel to carry on its onslaught, despite conjecture that there may be some sort of a conditional ceasefire. But truth be told, the situation on the ground could not have been more dire, could absolutely not have been more dire. The amount of children that have died over the course of the last 6 weeks, shooting up to as high as 13,000. And the way the reports by the UN agencies and international humanitarian organizations such as Amnesty International have come to the forefront, highlighting that women and children were shot dead, were literally executed by Israel's military, and the rhetoric that has been perpetuating by Israeli ministers and people at the helm of policy making makes it so obvious that no clear end in sight. The only way for this to end is that all the global political leaders, or various factions of policymakers, global international policymakers, call for an effective and immediate and unconditional ceasefire and ensure that both the United States and Israel comply with it. For that is the only way that the ICJ's provisional measures could be implemented. And more importantly, humanitarian assistance, the right amount of what is needed and direly called for by the Palestinian people is able to penetrate through the borders that have been blocked by Israel. And thousands of lives are saved. For it risks not only the death of Palestinian people, but in essence, it puts at risk the entire soul of humanity as the genocide in front of us is unfolding and is being witnessed in real time, live, with precise and graphic details.